अस्सलाम वालेकुम एंड वेलकम टू काम कहानी, पॉडकास्ट फॉर द करियर क्यूरियस। आज हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं फरवा टपाल। शी इज़ द CEO ऑफ पाकिस्तान फर्स्ट वेल्डिंग इलेक्ट्रोड्स बिजनेस। इट्स कॉल्ड पाकिस्तान वेल्डिंग इलेक्ट्रोड्स। शी इज़ ऑल्सो द co-founder ऑफ द फर्स्ट फीमेल लेड fintech ऑफ पाकिस्तान। इट्स कॉल्ड उड़ान। So let's talk to फरवा और आज जानते हैं उनकी काम कहानी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम फरवा।
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me here.
How are you?
I'm well excited to talk a lot about मेरी काम जो कहानी मैं अपनी काम के साथ करती हूँ. I was looking at this and I was trying to read it out and say
It's
something.
Kaam Kahani, read it. So let's start with a bit about your journey till Oraan. Okay, you're also a co-founder of that fintech. So just a bit about your journey. अभी तक Oraan जब से start किया, तो जब तक क्या journey रही?
Absolutely. तो मेरी journey, my career journey has been a very interesting. So I can't just say okay I got to Oraan because मेरा background, I'm an industrial designer by my first degree and I did a lot of design work for the first 10 years of my life. And I have applied, मैंने any kind of design, and it was a lot of product creation. When I got to Oraan, in 2018, everything was about the tech world. But usse pehle, when I graduated 2007 mein, nothing was tech. We were making real products, right?
Industrial age.
Industrial age. In fact, mugs banati thi, main packaging karti thi. I got into jewelry. I actually set up a jewelry. My first entrepreneurial experience was actually in the jewelry space. I started with my father. He was really interested. I did it for a year. I used to teach in it. I was in Canada actually working with jewelry, celebrity jewelry designers over there. I was in the packaging branding space, so I learned a lot about the graphic design space before I got into the UX UI space. Then I got into the education. I taught little kids in 2011, 4th grade primary. And from there, I actually was part of Pakistan's one of the earliest EdTech initiatives called the Reading Room Project. This was in 2013, so you can imagine उस वक्त EdTech around the world किस stage पे था and Pakistan में किस stage पे था. YouTube बंद हुआ था. That was the years when we were creating curriculums for online learning for for kids out of government schools, outside learning. So it was a very interesting time, curricular building alternatives for Rosetta Stone, language based. So for me, my career has always been in how can I build something innovative. Or जब शुरू में, like उसकी जो earliest stages, that idea आपको आया हुआ है, किसी और का idea है, and आप आते हो, research करते हो, and through that research or just getting into the depths of it, the first thing I did was, class में पढ़ रही थी, and I was like, oh, I've got to do this, And
At university.
University, during my career, and at the same time, I was always building my own stationery business. Very entrepreneurial journey, you guys will see. But I was building my own stationery business called Designs by Farwah. So one of the earliest ones making salami envelopes and boxing them and selling them across Pakistan in retail.
I remember when that big, up to everyone uses those fancy ones.
Absolutely.
People used to use those white
plain ones. आते थे वो बिल्कुल वो जो आपके paper market के. So I was one of the first ones to actually make those, sell them across and actually personalize them. So very early on. And to be honest, I actually continued that through Oraan until COVID. And so it was a very interesting journey of my life. I learned a lot. Inventory management, setting up, especially because when you have to do retail, that was the biggest thing, inventory management. And that's the first thing I learned about business, other than accounts and finances.
So you never did a job. You never worked for anyone else.
I worked in the jewelry space for somebody. I worked for short periods of time, for a year at a time, in between different stints.
But you always had your own dreams.
On the side, I've always had a side hustle. Always had a side hustle, even through school days, I would say. And then I went, after that, I went away for my MBA. And when I went for my MBA, one of my things was I'm going to come back and I want to start a business. And at that time, it was very much the tech space. The first thing I actually wanted to do was create an e-white space. So I wanted to come back because I was in the invitation space. I wanted to create the e-whites for Pakistan. जो आपका paperless post होता है या e-whites, आपका या at that time Canva is probably just starting up. And मेरी idea वो थी. So the first thing I'd done was at that time.
Canva stole it.
Huh?
Canva store.
No, Canva had already started. Canva does different stuff, right? So e-whites उस वक्त India में भी आ रहे थे, and it was just literally e-invitations आप बनाओ, and how can you distribute instead of paper invitations, right? And in our region, it doesn't make as much sense as it does in the north, because यहाँ पे WhatsApp पे भेज देते हैं. वहाँ पर it's very important that everybody gets something in their emails. It's a very different space, but the first thing I did, I was researching. I went to actually, उस वक्त एक्सपो में बहुत ज़्यादा वेडिंग एक्सपोज हो रहे थे, मैं वहाँ पहुँच जाती थी रिसर्च के लिए.
अच्छा, प्रॉपर मतलब रिसर्च होती थी?
हाँ, सब जगह. एंड फॉर मी आई हैड ऑल दिस शीट कि अच्छा आप ये प्रोडक्ट होगा तो ये बनेगा तो क्या होगा, यू नो. एंड दिस वाज लिटरली 3 months before Oraan really started for me. At the same time, at one of these places, the Momentum Expo, I actually met another colleague at that time, or another friend, who actually gave me the idea and actually worked with me to set up Oraan at that time, right? It was his idea कि देखें committees होती हैं, savings होती हैं, what is the opportunity?
तुम बताओ पहले committees होती हैं?
हाँ, उस वक्त मुझे तो पता था committees होती हैं.
पता था committees, तुमने use
किया था? मैं तो कभी नहीं यूज करती थी. मेरी अम्मी हर महीने इन कमेटी निकालती थी. या एंड मुझे जब पता चला कि अच्छा he's in committees में कुछ है, right? And savings, it was very interesting because he pitched, he's like, listen, you get to explore all of this group of Pakistan and middle income Pakistan जो तुम्हें business में अगर anyways जो कुछ भी चलाना है, you want to understand them.
So he gave you like a free idea?
He gave me a free idea. He worked with us for a good year.
Achha, he did.
He actually helped us bootstrap it. At that time, it was all his, and it wasn't. So for me, it was I was sort of, and I coming to it for the idea, helping research, and that's when I met through him Halima, right? So it was it was a very different journey early on.
Halima is your co-founder.
She was my co-founder. And so, the idea came, okay, what can we do? So the first thing actually was setting up a complete research, quantitative and qualitative, and getting out and understanding what kind of committees run, what is the opportunity. And the first thing I did at that point, I would sit, because I had no other office. Today I sit in that factory running it. At that time, I would go in every day and talk to all the workers. I would be like, okay, do you do committees? I would sit in my own house, be like, acha, anybody coming in and out of my house, acha, aap committee karte hain, kyun karte hain? And I'm not kidding, every single person was doing a committee in that group of people. So my research,
it was like you had
my research
struck gold basically.
I struck gold, right? Because I realized 1 second, like in my mother's group, chalo, 1 in like 5 or 6 people take part in committees. Meri ammi karti hai, meri khala karti hai. Maybe I had a bunch of friends being like, okay, join a committee with me, but I was like, I'm not interested because I can save, But as you go down the socio-economic pyramid, you start realizing how much more people do committees. And in the end, I found that on average, middle income is 41% up. But if you go even lower, it's up to 56%. That's your entire alternative. But and rural, urban is different. But
56% run committees.
अगर आप नीचे जाओ towards the bottom of the pyramid, more than half of your group of people will be doing committees. आप बाहर जाए, you ask आपके घर पे कोई काम करता है, आपके जो जमादार हो, आप उससे बात करो, right? आप अपने ऑफिस में कोई ऑफिस बॉय है, प्यून है, किसी से भी पूछो, उनमें largely everybody will be doing a committee. घर में 4 लोग होंगे, उसमें से 2 तो कर ही रहे होंगे. Because that's how they manage their house finances. आपको ट्यूशन करना है अपने बच्चों का, आपको शादी करवानी है, आपको कुछ भी करवाना है, right? But as you go up the pyramid, it comes less. But it doesn't finish.
So then you discovered कि अच्छा ये जो committees हैं, this is a real thing. Everyone's doing it.
Yes.
Like whatever 60% of Pakistan is doing
41
it.
On average, I would say.
Huh.
But it was amazing, right? But the funny thing was, as I started discovering it, as I started getting into it, I was like, this is gold. What am I doing? I'm really interested in it. And I got along, I got along with the people at that time. We were at the first, it was Khurram, myself, and 2 other people, not even Halima at that time, right? And slowly, as we started getting to know each other, it was like an exciting space, right? Because all of a sudden, you have people challenging each other, right? You have people coming from all different spaces, and you're like, oh, idea hai, ab kya kare? And the first thing we did was get interns. When I was doing my research, mujhe interns laane the. So we actually, because we were able to sort of advertise on LinkedIn, we got really interesting groups of people come to work for us. People out of a Minerva school from Islamabad were like, we're interested. I had interns. And so, बहुत मजे का था. It was a whole summer long, ended up being basically a summer long project at that time in 2018. And we all got to know the committee space. हम लोग तो बाहर निकलते थे कुरंगी के अंदर रोड पे, कहाँ नहीं निकलते थे with a tablet या फिर sheet of paper just to talk to people about committees. मैं wholesale markets में गई. At that time, then Halima had joined, so we used to go to other committees, and हम लोग हर जगह निकलते थे to figure out committees कैसे होती हैं, क्या होता है, and even online. But that was a very exciting part, right? And today, as I've actually recently been giving a workshop on market validation and, trying to, and I constantly say, spend the time on research. If nothing else, you will understand, even if you can't strike gold the first time, you will understand enough to change and pivot fast enough.
So when you figure out कि अच्छा यार ये market है, it's huge, you have to tap into it somehow, and committees होती हैं, how did you figure this out कि यार ये product भी बन सकती है?
Product बनाने के intention से ही निकले थे, right? That's my forte, right? Is to figure out what kind of product to build. And so the first thing I built was customer personas at that time, okay? And then say, okay, these customers, what is the high and low in a committee? And at that time we were like, okay, how can we monetize committees? What can happen? So our first, iteration of it was actually a ledger system. And we said, okay, and it was literally कि अच्छा पहली चीज़ जो हम लोग कर रहे थे कि जाके हम लोग उस वक्त कमेटी वाली आंटी के साथ हम लोग बैठते थे. We had gotten about 30 plus, started with 40, came on to 30, and 3 महीने तक हम लोग कमेटी वाले के पास जाते थे, बात करते थे, sheets of paper, and understood कि वो कमेटीज कैसे रन करते हैं.
Okay.
And that gave us the idea कि actually everybody needs a ledger system. बिकॉज आंटी तो अपना कर लेती है, बट जो सामने वाला होता है वो हमेशा होता है कि ओ ये हमें कमिट नहीं मिली टाइम पे, मेरे पैसे कौन से हैं, मेरे पैसे ये नहीं आए हैं, नहीं आए हैं. तो इट्स लाइक यू स्टार्टेड रियलाइजिंग दैट बोथ साइड्स हैड दिस पुश एंड पुल, ट्रस्ट फैक्टर. आपको पता है कि अभी भी लाइक ओ वो कमेटी चलेगी, इज इट गोइंग टू वर्क, इज इट वो भाग जाएंगे पैसों के साथ, वो तो आप सोचते ही हो, राइट? And so the ledger system, we're like, okay, and that sort of became sort of the basis of our product later on, right? Because without a ledger system, there's nothing that you can actually build for the future either. So the first thing we did was build a ledger, and that time, like I said, I was a researcher, I was a designer, I was the operator, har cheez, and it was 4 people at that time. Somebody else, Maya, at that time had come in and she was doing building educational curriculum, so educational content around this, right? Halima was going out and getting partnerships for us. We had somebody just running on finance and somebody helping to build the tech, right? One of the other founders at that time.
Education kya matlab? Like educating people?
So we found that very early on, you can't change savings behavior. And it wasn't, this whole thing wasn't कि बस committee करनी है. Actually, when we started off, it was we want to change how savings are done.
So like a movement.
We wanted a movement initially, right? And we realized that people are not going to save without more information. Like education and information go hand in hand.
Almost like behavioral change.
Absolutely. One of our earliest interventions was with HPS. So Habib Public School kids, 17-year-old to 18-year-old boys over there. And, हम लोग ने ran a 6-month pilot, or actually 1 साल का था. And it was interesting because हम लोग उनको everything about budgeting, saving and investing, we had a full session going on. At the same time, we ran a small committee with them, 500 rupee ki committee. And it was so interesting, by the end of the year, they actually, cut down on Netflix accounts. They were like starting to share Netflix accounts between people. And we were like, okay, very cool. But it was because there was 2 things happening at the same time. So we started realizing education and sort of understanding about budgeting and saving was very important. So we used to then put out a lot of content. For us, it was very important to put out content as well. And we started building that initially. And again, this was pre-COVID, right? A very different world. And we built the ledger system. We would work with all these aunties and people who were running committees, and we would get them on board. And then we realized, this doesn't always work, and it's not easy to monetize this, right? पैसे तो बनाने हैं, तो कहाँ से बनाने हैं? And that's when we actually ended up pivoting, later on, and we started thinking about, are we willing to take on risk, how much risk, etc., etc. And that's where the rest of Oraan started, So it goes through a journey,
Zabardast, yeah. It sounds so exciting. Yeah. Especially that phase when you're researching, when you're finding out And I can see it in your eyes, like, oh my God, committees, like I can just imagine that time. Like, oh my God, everyone's doing it.
हाँ,
Oh my God,
absolutely.
yes.
And वो stories जो सुनने की मिलती थी, ओह मैंने अपने बच्चे की पूरी शादी इस तरह से की और मैंने इतने बचाए हैं, या फिर IVF treatments or like
Wow.
some really interesting things used to come out of people we used to talk to, right?
It's really something like really important. It's important work, really,
Yeah.
which is not what you can say about your startup all the time. Not everyone can say that about their startups.
Yeah, I think any startup, I wouldn't say that. I see now myself starting up different things or like other people. So I think one of the most important things is I started reading and I, like learning a lot again recently, is that when you go into building a business, you don't want to only think about profit, but you want to think about it. I don't know who coined the word, but a one pocket versus two pocket. One pocket meaning that there's a mission, there's an idea, right? And you're serving. Your purpose of serving others or helping drive change is no different from you earning some money from it, or vice versa. So if you do one, you get the other. And it can be you earning money, but you make sure, or you're driving revenue and you're driving profits, but at the same time, this goes back to sustainability, right? I mean, today, why are recycled products, right? Aapke jo second hand hai, that's driving change as well. Right, because at the end of the day, वही चीज landfill में आएंगे, वो चीज आपके ऊपर.
So it's not just a fancy concept, but actually,
Yes.
It's an actual concept which needs to be put into place. And
Absolutely, and mission-driven work, right? That's important. That's important because I also find that you attract very interesting talent. You attract people looking to do things that are on your mission as well, and so you find people who you can relate to as well over time.
Really awesome. मुझे बताओ, why did you choose a co-founder? Like, why do you have a co-founder? What is the concept of a co-founder, and do you really need a co-founder every time?
So before I started Oraan, I was always realizing that you need somebody who's going to work with you because there are always different life circumstances that happen, right? And to be honest, at Oraan, I didn't go out to say I'm going to want a co-founder. This was actually chance, and it wasn't necessarily, we were thrown into a position in a space where it wasn't an option, sort of. So we were like, okay, you got a partner, and it wasn't just the two of us, there were four of us to start with, right? And we were thrown into a position where like, okay, this is something we have, and let's take this for what it is. And I say that a person to work with and co-founders are important because they help you deal with when things are down. They should, but it doesn't always happen. To be honest, it's been a difficult journey for myself as well, right? And I would say that co-founders can be very helpful, but they can also be very tough, right? We see a lot of things not work out also.
It's tough for two people to coexist and to agree on everything.
Absolutely, 2 or 3 or 4, right? And so I would say that anybody going into this, you always think about how can you make your life easier, because an entrepreneur's journey is very lonely. No matter what you do, it's not easy. There are many days when you're sitting there, even if you're working with your sister, your brother, right? And I've heard this conversations through other entrepreneurs and friends. They can be best friends or they can be, siblings. But there's so many of your responsibilities that are different that make you absolutely lonely. And at times when you need each other the most, the reality is the other might not be there for you. And that's unfortunately or fortunately what happens.
So there's no formula for selecting the perfect co-founder.
Never, right? We've seen siblings work out, which people never think they do, and we see absolute strangers work out. So I think it depends.
So now you work in a very different industry. You are the CEO of the Pakistan's first welding electrodes business.
Absolutely.
Okay, so explain to me in a bit what that even is.
Absolutely.
So that's an industry, right? So tell us about the contrast and how you deal with that.
Yeah. So, what I always found exciting is that I was telling you, I think it's a fun fact that Pakistan Welding Electrodes Private Limited was founded in 1952. So it's essentially been around since partition, and it was my dada's business, and my dad took it on very early on, right after high school, in fact, right? And my dad was a pioneer in this business and probably the sole person running a welding business up till probably the 80s, 90s. And it was this industry itself is like, it's a no-show business. Now, like in the tech world, everything is about the show. And you're like in the limelight, you're going out, you're branding yourself. This space is like aap glue bech rahe ho. There's nothing fancy about it. It's nothing showy. It's a completely different business. It's literally electrodes are what's joined two metals together. And I manufacture that, right? So it's a stick with a masala on it, like a pulgari in a way, right? And you use it to join two metals together. And that's a lot of what I have learned in the last 1 year as well. I knew a lot of this, but literal intricacies, right? Because it's a very technical business. So, you asked me the contrast. One is that one was a very fancy, sitting in an office, AC'd office in front of. It's a service business, right? You're sitting and it's much more cushier in some ways, right? And the other, you're going into the factory. AC to choro pankha bhi nahi hota hai. You're working with a lot of different labor. You're working in a very technical space in this case also, in my particular space, because I'm working with products that are steel and chemical compositions. So understanding, so I'm constantly sending things out for chemical testing. I'm trying to figure out how to upgrade. I'm looking at machinery, breakdowns, repair, maintenance, those kind of things.
What is your product exactly?
We manufacture electrodes.
Electrodes. So are there different kinds of electrodes?
There are different kinds of, it's like glue. आपके पास UH होगा, super glue होगा, आपके पास cement glue होगा, but that's for different kinds of products. Same as metal. Two metals always have to be joined together. आपके जो fabrication होगी, जाली बनती है, आपकी boiler pressure pumps बनते हैं, आपके tanks बनती हैं, हर चीज़, right? So
how did you do the research for this?
So in this case, the research was a lot of reading in the books when I started it. I mean, it was already a running business, right? It's been running since 1952. A lot of it was actually, when I took it on. So in the last year, unfortunately, there was a tragedy. My father passed away, and I did take this on, and when I did, I went into this not realizing really the extent of how technical it can be. So I was definitely thrown in one side. But, one thing I learned is you have to take and learn from everybody around you as well. All the managers, the production managers, my office, my sales guys. I mean, the sales guys were very different from the sales guys or business developers we were using, right? And you learn, and it takes time. I didn't have the patience initially, but step by step, right? Like thinking about codes and chemical compositions of each code, or whatever that might be, So you learn, and a lot of my research was learning and understanding, and then also constantly. Actually, I used to get my brand, market survey. मैं शुरू में बहुत करवाती थी, ताकि मैं समझूं कि market में क्या हो रहा है इस product के साथ. I would find out about just different things, right? So for me, it was learning about the business and the product itself more than actually, okay, I got to build something new.
Did you make any mistakes? कि जैसे things that you would normally do in Oraan as a matter of course, and then you try to implement them here. And then you realized, oh my God, no, this is a completely different ball game altogether.
I think I realized very early on that this is a different ball game. I think the one thing I realized that is, so I think my work at Oraan was very different than my work at Pakistan Welding in the sense that at Oraan I was the operator, right? I was building things, I was making the product, I was in a very different, my priorities were different, right? And in this business, my priorities have had to always be different, right? Dealing with shareholders differently, taxes, finance, product, pricing strategy, all of that, right? So I was like, oh my God. But it was interesting because I learned a lot within the last 5 years, even before all the businesses I'd run, just thinking about pricing strategy, thinking about the strategy of a business, how to make it more lean, cutting costs at a time, right? I got into this business and LCs were being shut. You can't bring in I get raw material from outside. So kya karu, right? So how do I import, and how do I import within and not have be a problem? Dollar rising actually affects me absolutely opposite than it would in Oraan, because Oraan mein mujhe dollar ke paise andar lane hain versus now spending. And I think those were so in that case it was very different but a very similar. I could take from one and implement into the other and really grow as well. I think the interesting part was the juxtaposition really of two very separate worlds, right? Like I said, when I was sitting at Oraan, it was a lot about different things. My priorities were different. We would the idea was in a VC venture backed business, you are actually taking from other investors and you're spending money differently. And in this case, from day one, I was like, oh my god, ये मेरे पैसे हैं and यहाँ नहीं तो मुझे shareholders को देने, ये मुझे shareholders को देने, या मुझे I have to make sure my employees get paid. And so it becomes a very different world in how you're thinking about your business and how you're thinking about cost efficiencies, how you're thinking about tax efficiencies.
So do a side-by-side comparison, okay?
Okay.
Workspace at Oraan versus workspace at Pakistan Electrodes, for example, and a couple of other things.
Oraan, I just made the office last year in 2022. I built a bright new office, very co-working space. In this case, जाती हूँ, it's a little bit more dingier. People are eating in this. People are eating differently. And I go, and the factory is different, right? आपके like 2-story factory.
There is a factory.
There's a factory, right? So it's a big workspace is very different. The bathrooms are very different. And little things like that, right? And then what else? Workspace, people.
And the work they do.
People are very different because you get people from young graduates from different kinds of colleges when you go to tech. When you're in a tech startup, and when I was at Oraan, whereas I'm getting a very different group of people coming from anywhere closest to my factory. So factories in sight, Orangi town se aa rahe hain, north se aa rahe hain. Proximity over there becomes a lot more important, right? Whereas in the tech startup, people are working more remotely as well. So I had people working across the world over there. So it's very different. And how do you work hybrid remote was also something you think about there.
वहाँ पर कोई concept है of remote working in your factory?
No. The thing is, actually, people don't want to.
If you're sick.
Nobody wants to also, right? Because a lot of the reality is a lot of people in Pakistan come to work to escape their own homes, whether it is a tight space or it is just because you want to come in and you want to meet people. Yeah.
And not everyone has the luxury of
internet.
Of internet.
Right.
As basic as that.
Absolutely. So
तो factory वगैरह में किस तरह से काम? Like how so? Because you obviously sit inside a factory, right? Your office is within a factory. तो वहाँ पर किस तरह से operate? Like do you deal with workers, with foremen, with people like that?
I deal with all of them. I've always been the sort of person who's like, I don't just look at, okay, I'm the top and I'm going to work. I'm not going to work with the most juniors. So junior से junior, जमादार से लेकर मेरे office boy से लेकर my manager, I will speak to everybody, right? But of course, there's a hierarchy in the sense that I'm not going to make decisions and I'm not going to go out and tell people something that my foreman or my production manager is supposed to manage, right? They'll come to me with the problems. But keeping that line of connection and constantly being around is very important.
Did you have to do something to build that credibility and trust with people?
Yeah, I look back and I would say that it takes time, right? And it's, they're like, oh, who is she? How is she going to work? Is she really going to be able to do this? Is she going to do this? While, because I'm a paymaster, they're never going to really make me feel that at the end of the day. That is she going to be able to do this? I felt that more from outside or from, my factory workers or my entire team was a lot more supportive. At the end of the day, their jobs are linked to me doing the work as well. So I think that's a very different, and I think that, one of the things you'd mentioned earlier was about family business. And I think in family business, that's more true than other businesses. If I was to go into a corporate environment and do that, it was very different. But in a family business, because the family is coming in, there's a different, and my father had a very familial relationship with his entire business as well, right? Because obviously he'd been running it for 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah, so it's more actually. I'm just giving you a ballpark over there, but so it changes. That's in family businesses. I have gone to my factory since I was a kid, so it's not like people have never seen me. So interactions are very different in that case in a family business.
So as a person at the top, the CEO, for both industries, for both companies, so what are the success factors? Like what makes you a successful business manager?
I think being humble. Again, everybody has a different leadership style, right? And I think one of my leadership style across any business and Oraan and Pakistan Welding, and even before, whenever I've worked places or run a business, has been more of sort of that mentorship. I enjoy teaching. So when people come and work with me, it's more like, okay, they definitely get the harsh side, but they also get a lot of learning. So and I'll work with people across the board, right? For me, I'll walk into an office and it's very important for me to greet everybody, whether it's the guard or it's my manager, right? And that's true of both businesses, right? For me, where I thrived was my team, right? It was the operations of it. It was getting to know everybody, seeing where the value lies. Not everybody, and no matter who comes in, a lot of people, you come in for a job, but the reality is you have to bring out their value, you have to bring out their skills for them to work, right? And that's where my strength really lies. And it's about nurturing that and helping them grow. And that takes a lot of energy, right? And I think that's sort of something that I don't always realize. I enjoy it, but it also takes a lot of energy because then you feel responsible, or you then have that relationship with people. But it's also the fun part, right? Because at the end of the day, for me, any business I run or I'm part of, I'm passionate about it, but I feel like the things that I've always remembered in my entire career have been those that have come back and said to me, oh, I learned this from you, oh, thank you, this happened, more than the money or any of the work, like the power around it, I would say. Recently, one of my first things in 2007, I'd moved back and I actually was teaching. I'd set up a curriculum for 3D modeling for the jewelry sector.
Okay.
And I'd run this in Southern, so I was running this with professionals there, but also workers. And recently I ended up going into a jewelry factory just, for a personal reason. And I met two guys who I taught.
Really?
Yeah, and they were doing so well, and they turned around, they they started speaking to me, and it was like, we wouldn't have been here if you hadn't taught us. And they were and I've had this happen to me on and off in the years, after Oraan, after any of my jobs. And that's really what drives me, right? My career or my life. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's what I enjoy. I would say that's the exciting part for me.
And you studied design, and then you had an MBA, right?
Yeah.
And did that help you, like?
So absolutely, and I think it's not, the MBA doesn't help you with technical skills. The MBA helps you because you learn to deal with people, right? All sorts of people, and you experience a lot of things. So for me, I think my design education was unparalleled. It was I think differently. I can break down problems very differently. I also when I did it, it was very skill-based also. Learned how to do carpentry, learned how to do metalworking, build up models, of stuff. In fact, when Oraan early days also, we were doing this branding this was at Dolman. We had in activation in 2019, I think. And I had another junior with me, Rahada. And the two of us, she ended up building this. And I was like, yeah, you got to do this way. And I was like building all these models with her to get it, put up the activation. It was so exciting. I was like, ye karte hain, so you figure this out,
You learned it.
You learned it. But you also learn how to conceptually think, right? You think how to break down problems, how to create products out of problems, right? And that was always that's what I got out of that.
So that's a transferable skill. You can use that in any industry, right?
Absolutely, right? And that's why, if you think about it, my entire career it's not one industry. I have gone from education to branding to fintech, and now to an industrial space, right? I've been in every industry, that's the exciting part for me, right?
So you're very happy that you did design, and that's really helped you
I think
in all the industries you've
absolutely, right? I think design, it also depends on what you do with it, right? I know when I meet any designer, graphic designer, UX, I can think, I'm like, oh my God, after 2 years of it, I was like, I don't want to be this CAD monkey. I don't want to be that Photoshop guy who's like, bas Photoshop kar raha hai, right? So I started learning skills. I started applying myself to different things. And that's how you grow, right? And if you're always thinking about what you're going to do next, or how can you add more skills, or how can you do other things, that's when you build up an entire range of skills that you can apply to other places or build businesses, to be honest. So, whether it was sales, right? Designs by Farwah, I was learning to sell all the time. I was learning to deal with shadi aunties or retail shop, procurement guys. While I was teaching, I was learning to deal with, I was working with teachers, I was working with admin, I was working with kids, Kids are they're the ones who teach you the most, because there's no like filter there. You know, you got to control yourself with them. Anybody who has kids knows that they teach you more than any other job will teach you, right? And you know, at Oraan, I learned I actually built a business from zero and I took it to one, right? And I took how to actually get to that point, taking like literally 0 people to about 75 people, managing all of that, right? And then at the same time, you get to see all the different things that happen in running or managing or finding funding or building products. And those skills then become applicable across the board.
What an achievement. And so now that you're a seasoned professional and an entrepreneur and a business manager, which you are, what are your plans for the future? And how do you, and one more thing, how do you envision your retirement?
Oh, my retirement sitting in is owning a cafe, maybe in the north or somewhere in the world, where, you know, my dream thing has always been, I'm going to have a cafe. Cafe. I love coffee, and I just want to be around people, random people, listening to their conversations, and, you know, doing that. So that's my future retirement. That's how I look at it. At the moment,
cafe and Hunza maybe.
Yeah, वो तो definitely सोचा हुआ है, 10 दफा सोचा हुआ है, पता नहीं कैसे पहुंचने वाली हूँ. You know, but every time I've been up to Hunza's a couple of times, and it is beautiful. You know, it's so nourishing to the soul, and, you know, some people are doing some really interesting stuff up there. So it's I don't know if you've been, but if you haven't, please take a trip up north.
Soon.
I'm sure your wife is going to be like, yes, you're doing it now.
Yes, now I have to. Farwah, it was such a pleasure talking to you, really. It was delightful, and I got to learn a bunch of stuff. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Wonderful talking to you. I was going to you guys. Well, it's to everybody. Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot for being on Kaam Kahani. Until next time, see you with another Kaam Kahani. Khuda Hafiz.